everyone to SHAC's continuing seminar series. I'm Frank James, I'm chair of SHAC. Those of you who are on YouTube, if you could put any questions in the chat box into YouTube, they'll be relayed to me later on. Those of you who are watching on Zoom, just put them in the chat box and I'll call them up in the order they appear. The talk will last sort of 20 to 30 minutes, and then we'll have a sort of 30-minute moderated discussion. So this month, it gives me very, very great pleasure to welcome Gabriele Ferrario, which I hope I've got more or less right, who is assistant professor in history of science at the University of Bologna. And the reason why he is doing this seminar today is because he has just completed editing the next issue of SHAC Sources, which will be out by the end of this year. He's worked in some very, very nice places over the course of his career. He did his PhD at University of Venice, he's worked at the Warburg Institute in London and the Chemical Heritage Foundation in Philadelphia. From 2010 to 17, he was a research associate at the Genizar Research Unit at the University of Cambridge, working on medieval Judeo-Arabic and Hebrew manuscripts in fragments. And while there, he was also a research fellow at Clare Hall. He spent 3 years teaching in the History of Science and Technology Department and the Program of Islamic Studies at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, where he lectured on the history of science and Islam, Jewish, Muslim, Christian relationships in the medieval world, and manuscripts, and on Islam more in general. And that's brought him to edit the Sources, which is on the Alums and Salts by Pseudo-Rāzī, which is what he's going to be talking about, and its tradition through centuries, languages and cultures. Gabriele.
Thank you very much, Frank, for this very kind introduction and for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to present my work to the members of SHAC and to all the others who connected online. So I'm going to try to share my screen so you can follow my PowerPoint presentation, which should have now appeared. Can you see my presentation now?
Spot on.
Okay, thank you. Well, medieval knowledge did not stay still. It moved between languages and cultures, often transmuting itself in the process. The knowledge of alchemy was no exception. Alchemy offers a particularly interesting example of knowledge in transit. Its practitioners sought to preserve the knowledge of their own authoritative sources, while at the same time seeking to interpret those works in light of their own experience. For practitioners of alchemy, ancient treatises might appear extremely relevant to their own theoretical and practical concerns, even as they work to reinterpret and reshape their contents. So in today's seminar, I'm going to focus on the history of the tradition of a medieval Arabic alchemical treatise that generally, but not always, circulated under the title The Book on Alums and Salts, or rather as Al-Kaul fil Milh in Arabic, De Aluminiibus et Salibus in its Latin translation, and as Sefer Alumei Umelachim in its later Hebrew translation. Generally, but not always, circulated under the title The Book on Alums and Salts, or rather as Al-Kaul fil Milh in Arabic, De Aluminiibus et Salibus. Sorry, there is a sort of echo that is reproducing my voice with some delay.
Really?
Now it's not happening anymore.
No, I think there was somebody else who had their microphone open.
Okay, so, well, I'll go on. If it happens again, I'll stop to check. But first thing first. So what is the Book on Alums and Salts? Where was it composed? And mostly, why should we care to study it today? So our story begins in 12th century Al-Andalus, where an anonymous alchemist composed an agile alchemical handbook. The work is divided into textual units, each one opening with a theoretical passage that functions as an introduction to various alchemical operations. There are sections on vitriols, on salts, on alums, on sulfur, and of course on the 7 metals. Recipes for preparing ingredients to enter the alchemical work are not ordered randomly, but instead appear in a logical sequence, where the final product of one often becomes the starting material for the next. These recipes define a well-organized sequence of operations that follows a precise plan dependent on the theoretical principles that are exposed in the treatise itself. In this sense, the On Alums and Salts represent a theoretical and practical alchemical program encompassing the science of matter, the theoretical investigation of nature, and a sequential description of the crafts needed for best employing and exploiting its features. Just to give you an example, in the section on sulfur, an explicit operative plan is briefly exposed right after a more theoretical description of the material. So on the scorpion, which is sulfur, its nature is like the nature of arsenic, and its preparation is like the preparation of arsenic, according to what the people of the work, so the alchemists, mentioned in their books. But I have not tried it. However, I've tried instead with the serpent, which is mercury, and have sublimed it. It gave me wonderful cinnabar. I tried it also for the combustion of Venus, which is copper, and it gave me wonderful rascat, which is burnt copper, as already mentioned, if God wants. So here is the important passage. The aim with sulfur is to stop it from burning, to remove its oiliness, and to whiten it, just as if it were arsenic. The best kind is the red one. So after this passage, the treatise consistently proceeds in the exposition of recipes aimed precisely and at accomplishing the goals that are set out here: removal of flammability, removal of oiliness, and whitening. This kind of programmatic harmonization of theory and practice is realized throughout the whole treatise. The physical features of a substance are described and analyzed. Then an operative plan aimed at curing its shortcomings is defined, and finally recipes for accomplishing those aims are plainly exposed. But how do we know about the On Alums and Salts? So there is only one extant manuscript of the Arabic text. It is preserved in Berlin at the Staatsbibliothek, where it arrived at the end of the 19th century as part of the vast collection of the physician and Orientalist Aloysius Sprenger, who lived extensively in India and later became professor of Arabic in Bern and Heidelberg. In the 12th century, the Arabic On Alums and Salts grabbed the attention of one of the most influential Arabic Latin translators of the Middle Ages, Gerardo Cremona, who was active in Toledo, Spain. Not only Gerard translated the treatise, but made something else that proved important for the future fame of this work. He attributed it to a certain Bubaker Magomet Filius Cezeri Ar-Rāzī, which is a crude Latin rendition of the name of Muhammad ibn Zakaria Rāzī, the 10th century physician, alchemist, and philosopher of renowned fame, the one who became known as Rhazes in the Latin world. The attribution to Ar-Rāzī did not come by chance, but probably relied on the similarity of tone and contents of the On Alums and Salts with the original alchemical works by Ar-Rāzī, and in particular with the Kitab al-Asrar, the Book of Secrets. The original Rāzian work, the Kitab al-Asrar, and its spurious Andalusian counterpart, our treatise, the On Alums and Salts, are similar in style, and when they overlap, they are also similar in contents, but their structures differ. The On Alums and Salts is organized by ingredient, while the content of the Book of Secrets is divided in sections on ingredients, apparatus, and operations. The language of the two treatises in particular is extremely close. Both tend to avoid decknamen, apart from the most common ones: names of planets for the corresponding metals, the eagle for soul ammoniac, the serpent for quicksilver, as we've seen, the scorpion for sulfur. So these are basically the decknamen that are used. As for the content, both works have been praised by scholars for their straightforward representation of laboratory practice. Scholars who worked on this text in the first part of the last century expressed their enthusiasm for the discovery of a first. The words of Ar-Rāzī are, in their words, clear precursors of modern chemistry and of the scientific method. In their fundamental 1927 contribution on the Kitab al-Asrar, Stapleton, Adzo, and Hidayat Hussain write, "For the first time in the history of the world, we find a systematic classification of carefully observed and verified facts regarding chemical substances, reactions, and apparatus, described in a language which is almost entirely free from mysticism and ambiguity." And on Al-Rāzī, they write, "He was the most noteworthy intellectual follower, the Greek philosopher of the 7th to the 4th century BC, that mankind produced in the 1900 years after the death of Aristotle." So there was clearly some enthusiasm regarding these works. The On Alums and Salts has been more soberly defined in 1929 by Robert Steele, one of the editors of one of the Latin translations of the work, as a classic of chemistry. I might add here one consideration derived from the research, the environment in which I'm lucky to work in Bologna. Both the Alchemist ERC project led by Matteo Martelli and the useful ERC project recently launched by Lucia Raggetti employ replications of historical recipes as a tool for the understanding of text and techniques that would otherwise remain disembodied. I myself take advantage of the presence of chemists roaming the corridors of our philosophy department, and I eagerly talk to Dr. Marianna Marchini, one of the chemists working on both projects, asking a educated opinion on the chemistry displayed in the recipes of the Kitab al-Asrar and on the recipes of the On Alums and Salts. Well, the recipes are plain and straightforward only in appearance. When faced with clear instruction like the one in the Rāzī text, the possibility of interpretation is locked to the text, and one is led to follow the prescriptions by the letter. The problem is that what is prescribed appears to be overabundant and at times contradictory or counterproductive on the level of practice, at least to the understanding of a scholar trained in modern chemistry. While some of the ingredients would behave as they are described in the treatises, the role and function of many of the ingredients listed appear unclear, and the chemical sense of many passages of the more complex recipes tend to escape our understanding, at least for the time being. A common expression of comment by the chemist reading this recipe is, "Ooh, quanta roba," which translates as, "Ooh, so much stuff," or "too much stuff." So anyway, the similarity in contents and style of the original Rāzī work and of the On Alums and Salts was likely one of the reasons that led Gerardo Cremona to the pseudo-attribution of our treatise. Surely this was very beneficial for the fame of the On Alums and Salts. Back to our sketch of the history of the transmission of this work, we currently have 7 Latin manuscripts of the translation of this work, dating from between the 14th and the 15th century and preserved in Palermo, Paris, Oxford, Jena, London, and Bologna. And so here you can see the incipit of the treatise in a 14th century manuscript known as the Codex Speciale, which is the one preserved in Palermo. The fame of the On Alums and Salts did not stop at the translations. It was used as one of the main sources of alchemical knowledge by 2 encyclopedists of the 13th century. Vincent of Beauvais quotes the On Alums and Salts in several passages of his Speculum Historiale and of the Speculum Naturale. And Roger Bacon uses it in his Opus Minus. So the introduction of quotations from the On Alums and Salts in these encyclopedias consecrated the work actually really as a classic of medieval chemistry and further expanded its influence and its readership. But there is more. The treatise has a 3rd linguistic incarnation in an early modern Hebrew translation. The On Alums and Salts appears in a multiple text Hebrew manuscript now at Berlin Staatsbibliothek. The Hebrew manuscript does not say anything about its translator, copyist, destination, and place of production. The first few folios where this data may have been found are lost. We would fumble in the dark were it not for few bits and pieces of information the Jewish copies left between the lines and in the margins. Not only through these we can roughly figure out where and when the Hebrew version was produced, Well, but we may also be able to infer something about the Jewish copyist's reading practices and operative engagements. So where was this version, the Hebrew version, produced? The language of the manuscript, excuse me, is Hebrew, or better, it looks like Hebrew, since it is written in Hebrew letters, but the text is interspersed with a large number of Italian words and expressions. So we can see this, take this page for examples and just look at the first few lines up here. So in this passage on alums, the underlined words in red are not in Hebrew, but they are Italian words in Hebrew transliteration. So, and I'm reading, and they say that alum is the ioter nobili, so the most noble, the noblest of all stones, since it is called on account of its ferment, and it is the most conveniento, so conveniente in Italian, convenient in English, of everything for rectifying arsenic. In my opinion, sulfur as well. And this is simply, and in the text we have e semplicemente, so and semplicemente in Italian, so and this is simply the most advisable. So for advisable we have consigliabile, consigliabile. The modalities of its operation are that you take this Yemenite alum, which is white, and then it says luminoso e puro, so shiny and pure. So you see this phenomenon of a mixture of languages, all in Hebrew characters, but there is a lot of Italian. So this phenomenon is common to the whole text and appears to point clearly to an Italian origin of this translation. But when was the Hebrew translation made? So we have more or less asked the where, but we haven't asked the when yet. So the Jewish copyist did not limit himself to straight translation, but he actively intervened in the text and in its margins, adding notes, comments, opinions, and quotations of other works. In one of such quotations, we read, Nazari told me that he tried to distill sheets of tin and obtained a white poisonous water. This reference appeared to establish a direct transfer of knowledge between the alchemical authority called Nazari and our Jewish writer. It says explicitly, Nazari told me, implying a sort of oral exchange between the two. So who can this Nazari be? One possibility is that Nazari may be identified with Giovanni Battista Nazari, a partially well-known 16th century scholar of alchemy, among other things, that was born in a town called Saiano, which is located northwest of Brescia, in the wine-producing area known as Franciacorta, northern Italy. Although this identification is a conjecture, some elements of Nazari biography and intellectual production may fit well with the alchemical expertise that our Hebrew commentator attributes to him. So the historical Giovanni Battista Nazari is known for the alchemical treatise Della Tramutazione Metallica Sogni Tre, so 3 dreams about metallic transmutation, an alchemical work rich in allegories that gained a discreet fame after its publication in 1599. Moreover, the Italian setting fits well with the linguistic oddities of the Italian lexicon of our Jewish alchemist introduces in his translation. So if the identification of the quoted Nazari with Giovanni Battista Nazari is correct, this was provide us with a valuable evidence for the place of production and dating of the manuscript. It was possibly composed in northern Italy, perhaps in the vicinity of Brescia, during the lifetime of the Jewish alchemist who met Nazari in person, that is, between the second half of the 16th century and the first half of the 17th century. The mention of another book, a certain Sefer Elim, on the margins and in the body of one of the anonymous texts that are around the text of the On Alums and Salts in the manuscript, points to a more precise date, to the early 17th century, because a Sefer Elim by the Cretan physician Joseph Shlomo del Medico was printed in Amsterdam in 1629. So it seems that we can place this Hebrew translation somewhere in Italy, possibly northern Italy, around the first half of the 17th century. But how this Jewish alchemist, this Jewish translator, was reading his source? Why was he interested in this alchemical booklet? The answer to these questions reveal the practical operative engagement of our Jewish reader with his source and his commitment to an exegesis of the recipes of the On Alums and Salts that possibly implied the replication and reproduction in a laboratory. So let's now look at the recipe for the production of silver from copper and mercury in the Arabic original and the Hebrew translation. So these are the images of the passages in the manuscript, and these are the translations. So apologies for the massive amount of text, but these are very long. And you can clearly see that the Arabic text is way shorter than the Hebrew text. So this is one of the features of this Hebrew translation, that it shows a lot of interventions, sort of interventionist reading strategies. So all the portion of text in bold that you see on the text on the right are additions that are not found in the Arabic original text, comments and alternative readings. So often these additions are introduced by the abbreviation Nun Lamed, which stands for Nirei Li, it seems to me, in Hebrew, or another abbreviation which is Samech Aleph, that is Sevara Acheret, another interpretation. So for reasons of time, I'm not going to read through the whole recipe, but take a look at just take a look in passing to the words in bold character. So here we have a sort of comment to the fact of taking a certain amount of mercury, and the comment is, in my opinion, take tin, and then there is another interpretation regarding quantities, so take 3 times the amount of copper, not the same amount, and then further down it says, it adds some comments on the operation, so one should water and roast what he has produced. Further down, and the brackets are present in the manuscript, so there are brackets, and there is the abbreviation for, in my opinion. There is a whole other operation that is inserted between the lines, smear with it sheets of clean silver or of tin, warm them up little by little until it penetrates them, and so on. So these additions in bold can make the text expanded, way longer, and these are just one example in one recipes, but this practice of additions and internal commentaries in the text goes on through the whole work. So these annotations reveal a keen and well-informed engagement with the treatise technical contents. Most of the additions and marginalia suggest practical interventions, clarifying, correcting, and expanding the contents of the main text by supplying additional information on the quantities, details of apparatus, ingredients, and procedures, apparently, at least in the mind of the person who wrote these notes, to make the recipes work in practice. To provide such a wealth of commentary, the copyist translator compared the material in his source text to his own knowledge. Moreover, the practical nature of his annotations appears to reflect the lived experience of a practitioner, rather than only knowledge derived from books. But not all commentary is textual in nature. The copyist of the Hebrew manuscript also incorporates sketches of alchemical apparatus to illustrate and expound the text. So there are no drawings in the Arabic original or in any of the Latin version that I've seen, but they appear over the Hebrew text. There are these drawings of apparatus that are the most common type of drawings that we find in medieval alchemical works. If we go on later, we find also drawings that are more symbolical, allegorical, but drawings of apparatus are a large part of the sort of visual elements of medieval alchemical works. So here I have a few examples of these drawings. The first one is the one you see on the left of the screen. So this illustrates basically 2 variations of the same kind of equipment. This apparatus appears in a recipe for extracting fat out of egg yolks. So the egg yolks should be put in a vessel called ashisha, in Hebrew, a word that I haven't found anywhere else, a kind of cucurbit, and placed over a clay pot. So the vessel is turned upside down so that its neck fits into a hole previously drilled in the bottom of the pot and sealed in place. The pot is kept in place by a tripod so that the neck of the hashisha passes through the hole and opens into a receiving vessel below. 4 fingers of manure should be placed in the pot so that when the manure burns, fire surrounds the hashisha, causing the fat of the yolks to drip down into the receiving vessel. The second image below shows a variation of the same kind of apparatus. When stronger temperatures are required, a second clay pot should be placed upside down over the first pot and then sealed. The space around the hashisha vessel between the 2 pots is filled again with manure and a fire lit on top of the covering pot so that the high heat causes the material inside the hashisha to drip into the receiving vessel. So here we have the representation of a complex kind of apparatus that is described in the text, and the Jewish copyist finds it useful to draw a sketch of these 2 variations of the same apparatus that basically are a apparatus of distillation per descensum, let's say. Not only all the illustrations are so complex, so you can see the other 3 images on the right side. So for instance, the first one on top is basically 2 crucibles that are sealed together, the upper crucible having a hole at its base. So this drawing is accompanied by a recipe, and the text directs the users to place a black ash obtained by heating olive oil in vinegar for one night in the upper crucible, together with some natron and olive oil again. The entire apparatus is then placed in a goldsmith's furnace, and the material that drips through the hole into the lower crucible will form a white stone, according to the recipe. Sometimes, and these are the last 2 examples, diagrams might help to clarify less conventional apparatus, like these 2, where we find them in a recipe for making a white wax that includes some very bizarre instruction, or alternatively some very complex and unsolved decknamen. So the practitioner says the recipe should start by killing 3 snakes and pulping their bodies. Then he should then pound the spleen of a lamb in a mortar and shape it into a thread before covering it with the pulped snake meat and placing both at the bottom of an instrument described as, and here the Hebrew text is not clear because it's using an Italian word, but probably the word got so corrupted in the transliteration, it reads like something like birinion, but I haven't been able to identify which kind of instrument this is. Luckily, there are these drawings. So what we can gather from the text is that this term is describing some sort of pan with a pierce base. So like the drawing that we see there between the lines, a little pan with some holes at the bottom. The copy seems to have recognized the problems presented by both the apparatus and its content. And so a sketch of the fan emphasizes the pierced base that is needed for this operation. He also adds another drawing to illustrate the correct disposition of the snake and lamb sausage, if we want to call it like that, inside this birinion to form a spiral shape. So in sum, the Jewish copyist or translator seems to have used drawings of apparatus as a strategy for better understanding his source text, while also providing visual support for his own readers. He treats images an integral part of his transcriptions, inserting them into the source text much as he does with textual notes, sometimes leaving blank space on the page and then filling in the drawings, other times shaping his text around the sketches. He seems to have had no decorative goal in his mind. These are not beautiful drawings, but rather he used the drawings as an extension and clarification of the running text, a form of visual commentary. So the Hebrew version of the On Alums and Salts perfectly illustrates one of the typical phenomena that characterizes the transmission of authoritative or pseudo-authoritative, as in the case of the Pseudo-Rāzī, alchemical texts. So source material is preserved and at the same time expanded, commented, corrected. The serious and devoted engagement with the recipe of the On Alums and Salts displayed by our early modern Jewish reader possibly implies delving into alchemical laboratory practice. So I may now be in the right place in Bologna to take a further step in the studying of these notes and additions that are disseminated throughout the Hebrew translation. By attempting the replication of the recipes of the Arabic text as they are, and then trying the alternative procedures suggested in the Hebrew translation and in its notes, it might be possible to grasp the level of practical expertise of the Jewish writer and learn something more about the ways in which alchemical texts were read and put to text in the alchemist workshop. Of course, this can only be achieved when philologists, historians of science, and chemists work side by side, reproducing in a way the exegetical efforts of alchemists of past times. And now to conclude, the journey through different versions of the On Alums and Salts reveals more than the transformations undergone by the text of the treatise in its three linguistic incarnations. It also opens a window on readers, translators, and practitioners from medieval Al-Andalus to early modern Italy. On Alums and Salts was seamlessly appreciated by readers and practitioners belonging to the Muslim, Christian, and Jewish communities, and became a point of confluence and exchange among these three traditions. All its translators and readers left their trace somehow on the extant witnesses of the On Alums and Salts, a trace that speaks more about their shared scientific interest than it does about their community of origin and religious affiliation. The doctrinal richness and practical usefulness of this medieval alchemical work, produced in a specific cultural context, allowed it to be received positively by the other communities and throughout many centuries, in a continuous textual and practical exegetical effort that crossed linguistic, chronological, cultural, and religious borders. So, and very finally, a moment of shameless self-promotion, but already Frank has already said this, so I'm very happy. So if this presentation has sparked some interest or curiosity about the On Alums and Salts, I'm happy to announce that you will be able to read more about it very shortly, I hope, so before the new year, fingers crossed, but I think that the proofs have already been sent, so the process should be quick now. So thanks to SHAC, the ERC Project Alchemist, Robert Temple, and the patience of Jennifer Rampling and Larry Principe, who are the editors of the series. My monograph on the On Alums and Salts should appear as the second volume of the series of Ambix supplements, Sources of Alchemy and Chemistry. So the book will include an introduction, the edition and the first English translation of the Arabic text, the first edition and first English translation of the Hebrew version, and some appendixes with a lexicon of a trilingual lexicon of alchemical terminology. And all subscribers to Ambix, so the members of SHAC as well, should receive a copy of it together with Ambix. So again, apologies for the self-promotion, and thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gabriele. That was absolutely fascinating. And if I could just sort of emphasize your final sentence, that if you're a member of SHAC, you will automatically receive a free copy of Gabriele's sources. If you're not a member of SHAC, by the time it's published, then I'm afraid you're going to have to pay a slightly large amount of money to get the copy of sources. So there's another shameless plug to join SHAC for those of you who aren't already members. Okay, so while you're thinking of questions, if you put if you just put your not so much your hand up, you put a note down in the chat. I'll call you forward when we've done. I will use my normal chair's prerogative and ask the first question. And that's about these illustrations. How common at this sort of time are illustrations of this kind of apparatus in the sort of alchemical laboratories? And are there any archaeological survivals of these pieces of apparatus, so you can compare what survived with the drawings?
So as far as, let's say, Jewish alchemy, so the manuscript reporting alchemical recipes and text in Hebrew or Judeo-Arabic, illustrations like this one are very, very rare. There is one famous manuscript preserved at the British Library, manuscript called Gaster manuscript, that has been the base of all the ideas that we have up to now about medieval Jewish alchemy, because there is something more in other sources, but this has been used as a main source of our knowledge. There are few drawings of alchemical apparatus that are slightly more refined than the ones that we find here on this manuscript. As for the archaeological evidence, it depends on whether we are looking at the 17th century, from which we have materials and we would be able to compare it to the ones that are in the Hebrew editions, because these editions, we find them in these 17th century translations. So it is likely that this is a kind of apparatus that was available at that time. If we want instead to see what kind of archaeological evidence remains from the Middle Ages, this is a bit more complex, not much is left. I remember reading some reports on an excavation that was conducted around old Fustat, the old city of Cairo, by Iscanlo, that excavated a number of pieces of glass that showed that the technology for producing apparatuses like alembics and retorts was available at the time. But the destination of the instruments excavated by Scallon is not extremely clear. So one instrument that I had interpreted as a sort of retort was then commented by people that were more informed than me on the archaeological side as a tool for extracting milk from lactating women. So I got it wrong. But at least the shape and the technology for producing such instruments was present already in the Middle Ages. But
okay. Right. Well, we're going to continue on the operation. So Keith Tabor's got a question. Keith.
Yeah, thank you very much. I may have misheard something, but I was interested when they showed those first two diagrams, where I think you said that it was basically the same kind of apparatus, but the second version was used for getting a higher temperature. Now, I know a lot of these kind of recipes don't look very convincing to a modern ear because we don't always understand exactly what they're doing and what they're using. But I would have thought that you wouldn't get a higher temperature in the second one, because in the first one, you've got fuel directly around the kind of reaction vessel. In the second one, the manure is, if anything, acting as an insulator. It's not going to burn because it's not got access to the air. The lid on top, I think, is metal, so it's going to be radiating heat around. The things burning on top will largely be, sending the heat away by convection currents. Yet you would think that that's something they wouldn't get wrong. So I'm surprised about that. Do you know if anybody's tested these things out at all?
No, there has been no test on these, also because one should basically construct the apparatus from scratch or try to adapt the modern chemical apparatus to those times. I think that I remember that the covering pot, let's say the one that goes upside down in the second drawing, is made of clay. Not that these changes much your observation, which is very useful. So it is not clear at all from the text whether the manure that is inside, enclosed inside the external pot, needs to be lit up or not. The fire would not last very long, because it is clearly said that the covering pot should be sealed to the walls of the first one.
Yeah.
So, and those that are placed on top are pieces of coal.
Okay.
But if the manure inside is not heated, then because it's not, the text is not explicit, it could be also the opposite. A similar instrument that cooks the material inside this instrument that is upside down, the hashisha, that is that goes through the hole at the bottom, cooks it more gently for longer periods of time. So this could be, but the text is not very clear regarding what's going on with that particular piece of apparatus.
Okay, fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Alex Angerhoff has got a question now. Alex?
Yes, so my question actually goes along the same lines. I was curious about this inverted distillation apparatus. I mean, in many manuscripts, you don't see that. And so I was curious where that comes from. Does the text actually tell why to use it in this configuration rather than in the normal configuration where the part is at the bottom? And the other question, I guess I might add, is I've seen the inverted configuration more in descriptions of Indian alchemy and Western alchemy. So I was curious whether that actually comes from Rāzī and I guess his connection to India.
So regarding this configuration, I haven't seen it anywhere else, but it's clearly connected to the description that we find in the text. So text and drawings go together. And while the text may give the possibility of wrong interpretations or like of other images that could be constructed out of their text, the drawing seems to like clarify how that should look for making it work, for basically for extracting this grease or oil from egg yolk that would, according to the recipe, descend in the receiving vessel. Regarding Indian alchemy, well, the connection of Rāzī with India is surely strong, even if in the On Alums and Salts, that is a Pseudo-Rāzian text, there is only one mention of Indian alchemists regarding their opinions on which is the best kind of salt to be used in alchemical operations. The interesting fact is that we find this mention of Indian sages, Hukama al-Hind, in the Arabic text, and this is one of the two times in which the religious component of the Hebrew translator pops up, because he substitutes Indian sages with Jewish sages. And in another passage, the other one, which is maybe an interesting fact, is that when he is praising the usefulness of salt in all sorts of alchemical operation, he quotes a passage from Psalms, where it's written that you should put salt on all your offerings. And that's it. Clearly is not present in the Latin or Arabic versions. But thank you.
Okay, and Peter Jones. Peter.
Thank you, Gabriele. And congratulations on your findings here, which are very exciting, and I look forward to the publication. My question is, in relation to the Latin translation manuscripts, is there any sign of the kind of practical exegesis that characterizes your Hebrew version at all? And if there isn't any sign of this kind of practical exegesis in the way of annotation or responses to the manuscript, can we draw any conclusions from that about the nature of the engagement of the Latin readers with their text?
Thank you. So, of course, I read more closely and I work more closely on the Arabic and Hebrew versions, but of course I've checked the editions and some of the manuscripts of the Hebrew of the Latin translations of the work, and they don't seem to have not even closely the same amount of notes, addition, corrections. They appear to be more straightforward copies of possibly two different translations, different branches of Latin translations of the text. The late Catherine Arbuthnot had prepared a preliminary edition of the of these Latin versions, trying to let's say collate all the extant Latin versions. And this work then has been also revised by Professor Burnett at the Warburg Institute, and they seem to preserve, all considered, a text that is very close to the Arabic one. Of course, the Arabic text is lacunose. There is a whole section in the middle, and an important one, because it's the section on gold that has dropped from the Arabic manuscript. Probably an entire choir fell off. So the Latin version preserved that portion that is not available in the only extant Arabic manuscript. But they seem to follow the Arabic text very, very closely. So if we can talk about practical engagements as they result from this Hebrew version, the same cannot really be stated as far as the Latin versions are concerned. They seem, for instance, the Palermo Codex is the Palermo Codex appears to have been a sort of like literary product, more than a product destined for the use in a laboratory or for some practical use. There are illuminated headings, rubrications, and let's say the style of writing, production of the manuscripts looks, let's say, more luxurious or more rich than one that may have been copied only for practical use. For instance, the Hebrew manuscript is very small. It's like 7 centimeters by 5. It really looks like a little handbook, a portable handbook. While the Palermo Codex is thick and full of other alchemical works from Latin and Arabic authorities.
Thank you. That's very illuminating, Gabriele. Okay,
so I don't have any other questions in the chat box at the moment, so I'll ask another one. I was fascinated that you have this Hebrew manuscript, and I was really interested just when you said just now how small it was, where you get Italian words transliterated into Hebrew. Now, does that mean that those sorts of words don't exist in Hebrew, or is there something else going on there? And how common is that sort of practice at this time?
So, well, the presence of these Italian words have been interpreted differently by different scholars. Already Steinschneider, who in the 19th century cataloged a lot of Hebrew collections from all over Europe. When cataloging the Berlin collection, he looked at this manuscript and he said that there were these words from a Latin language, possibly Italian, and he said, and with this also another scholar, Raphael Patay, who dealt with this book, agreed. He said that they were using these words where easy Hebrew equivalents were not available. And it is clear from the Hebrew text and the syntax and grammar of the Hebrew translation that this Jewish author was not a master of style in Hebrew. It's a very rough Hebrew with a lot of variation even from a Renaissance Hebrew. So it's not just non-biblical or non-classical Hebrew, but it's also like agrammatical and asyntactical at times. The interesting thing is that, well, these are not, for instance, you would imagine that someone who didn't know Hebrew that well would use a language that they knew better, like Italian, for expressing names of technical, alchemical ingredients or apparatus. But this is not the case, because in the Hebrew version, we find common expressions like through which fire is placed, like a sentence that doesn't create any problem in Hebrew and doesn't contain any dekname or anything particularly complex. All words are very plain and straightforward. It's rendered in Italian anyway. So it is yet not very clear the reason why there is this amount of Italian. One thing that this can point at is the idea that this alchemical handbook was produced for the use of the person who wrote it, who wrote it in the language that he felt like using and reading and understanding also in a second time, because thinking about it as something destined for a wider readership is in contrast with this very weird use of an intermixed, mixed language. Then in the Hebrew tradition, of course, there is a long and multifaceted evidence for the use of the Hebrew script while writing other languages. For instance, my work in the Geniza unit, I found like 110 alchemical fragments written in Hebrew letters, but Arabic language. And this is Judeo-Arabic. So in Spain, we have Ladino, that is Spanish written in Hebrew letters. And Yiddish is more or less, very roughly, sort of German written in Hebrew letters. So this practice of writing other languages in Hebrew letters was very common among Jews who lived in countries where another language was the main spoken language. But this is a peculiar case because it's not only Italian in Hebrew letters, but it's Hebrew and Italian intermixed all over the place with Hebrew. So it's a mixture. So it still puzzles me, even if I looked at it for many years.
Okay, and I think with that I will draw the seminar to an end. Just to say, next seminar will be on the 9th of November, when Adrian Wilson will be talking about some discontinuities in 18th century instrumentation. And on the 25th of November, SHAC will be running a one-day meeting in person at University College London on the theme of alchemy and chemistry in the long 18th century. And looking at the Office of Papers I've had, it will certainly be the very long 18th century. Putting on seminars such as this requires a lot of people with a lot of different skills to get everything going. So I'd sort of like to thank my colleagues, Rob Johnson, Anna Simmons, Caroline Cobbold, Becky Martin, Chris Campbell, and Joe Hedison for all their input in getting Gabriele's seminar to everybody's screens. And of course, to thank Gabriele for giving us a really, really interesting seminar. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing sources when it comes out, as I am sure you are. So
yes.
very many thanks.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you. And have a good evening, everyone.
Have a good evening stroke day, depending on where you are in the world. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Bye. Thank you.